Welcome to the Chapter 22 Flipped Classroom. In this flipped classroom, we're going to go over how Europe gets into the exploration game, meaning how they get into moving around the world and, kind of discovering all that's out there, right? They're going through their adolescence. I apologize for my voice right now. I'm sick, but we've got to get this done, so let's get started. On this map, you can see the different voyages of the Europeans, and then this voyage over here, this is Zheng He's exploration, which starts a little bit earlier in the 1400s. You read about this in chapter 21. But we're gonna be talking about these other guys like Da Gama, Columbus, and Diaz, just really briefly. So this chapter really focuses on key concept 4.1, which is globalizing networks of communication and exchange. So, firstly, the interconnection of the Eastern and Western European hemispheres made possible by transoceanic voyaging marked a key transformation in this period. So, this is the big change. There were technological innovations that helped to make these voyages possible, and the changing patterns of long distance trade included the global circulation of some different types of commodities and new regional markets and financial centers. The increased transregional and global trade networks facilitated the spread of religion and other cultural elements, as well as the migration of some large numbers of people. And that we'll be getting into more later on in chapter 24. But bottom line, there's a lot more interaction going on between people. This is really important. Western Europe slowly imposes their will on the world, increasing and resulting in a changing of power or hegemony, however you want to say that. But this does not happen immediately. Some people think, oh, as soon as Europe shows up on the scene, they take over trade in Asia. No, not happening. The Europeans play a very small role in the Indian Ocean at first, and in Africa and in China. And that only changes slowly over time. In the Americas, it's a different story, of course. Plants, animals, and technology and disease were also spread. Germs carried to the Americas ravaged the indigenous population, while the global exchange of crops and animals altered agriculture and people's diets and populations around the planet. And the result, by 1450, we have a new balance of global power. So, how does exploration begin? This kind of goes back to chapter 21. You have to remember that Europe is coming out of the Middle Ages, which is a mainly solitary time for them. And with these new ideas that come from mercantilism, they're really looking for profit. They have had a taste for sugar from the Turkish trade or the Turkey trade, and which was spread originally through the Islamic trade that goes way back to the Abbasids and the Umayyads. And they have a desire to get it. And sugar doesn't grow in England, so they need to figure out how they're going to acquire more of these goods. They also have this religious zeal. Remember, Christianity had always governed European life in the Middle Ages to the umpteenth degree. And now, with the Reformation, which will happen right around this time, you have this idea that Catholicism needs to expand, especially Catholicism. So begins in this exploration begins in Portugal with the development of a school of navigation by Prince Henry the Navigator, or Dom Henrique, and that leads to increased travel and trade with West Africa, which is where you're getting all the sugar from. And the islands around Africa become hotspots for Europeans, and the Europeans take over some of those islands and start to grow sugar on them. This leads to the need for slavery because producing sugar is very labor intensive, and so you can't make any money off of it, at least during this time, if you don't get your labor really, really cheap. The other place that people wanted to get to, and this is like a huge deal, and we know this, is the East. India, right, which the Europeans call basically anything foreign in Asia. Um, Hence the big snafu or the big mistake with calling the Bahamian region or the Caribbean, the East Indies. I mean, come on, guys. So the race for India starts out with Vasco da Gama and Christopher Columbus. Vasco da Gama was uh, supported by Portugal, and he decided that he wanted to go east to get around the Cape of Good Hope, around Africa, to get to India to get those spices and that cotton. But Christopher Columbus was like, no, we're going to go west. I think the globe is smaller than it actually is. And although the Portuguese passed on the opportunity to have Columbus do this because they already had Vasco da Gama going east, they were funding him. Um, Christopher Columbus goes west to find India, and that is financed by Spain. And this is the beginning of competition between European powers for global domination. So, when we come back, we will learn more about this competition and the motivation for the beginnings of exploration.